The darkness feels like I'm walking in a silent tunnel in the underworld, except I'm on a road near the ocean on the big island of Hawaii, near this off-the-beaten-path retreat center called Kalani, which means the sky or the heavens in Hawaiian. And when I go for my morning run, it's so dark outside that I could hardly see my hands or my feet. And in this next moment, as I'm listening to music, I get the most extraordinary intuitive message. And this message ends up saving my life. Now, when people ask me later what this feels like, I tell them that it feels expansive, like I'm connected to everything and everyone. And after this moment, everything that I understood about the world with my logical mind was forever changed. Now, let me rewind. In 1929, Edwin Hubble discovered that the universe is expanding. And while everything in the universe is expanding, it appears that many humans are choosing contraction rather than expansion. They're choosing contraction by prioritizing materialism, partaking in wars, polluting the ocean, and destroying nature. Now, in other words, they're going against the flow of the universe. But what about the universe within us? I mean, how do most of us perceive reality? Through our logical mind and our five senses, right? Well, what about your intuition? Intuition is defined as the ability to understand something instantly without the need for conscious reasoning. Now, the great philosopher Aristotle said that we have five senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. But according to Dr. Francesca McCartney, we have actually 21 extrasensory intuitive senses. Now, some of these include things like clairaudience, which is clear hearing, clairsentience, which is clear feeling, clairvoyance, which is clear seeing, and sometimes our intuition comes in symbols and even smell. A lot of people confuse intuition for things like instinct or projection or body trauma, and I believe that every single person has access to different intuitive senses, except almost no one has gone through any formal educational training when it comes to intuition, which is a tragedy. So after I discovered my extrasensory gift of clairaudience in Hawaii, my life forever changed. I had this message that came through that told me to take 2 steps to the left. And so now I'm in the middle of the road, and about a minute later, a huge semi-truck turned onto the road, missing my shoulder by a centimeter. Now, I had had a lot of intuitive messages in the past, but this was one I just could not ignore. And I decided to devote my life to studying intuition, earning a master's certification in Intuitiion Medicine, and studying with the masters across the world. I've now interviewed over 150 people on my podcast who are leaders of intuition and consciousness, and I believe that we're only at the very beginning of understanding a very important skill set to master in this next century. I now teach intuition to leaders, and I also use my intuition to manage my energy and not my time. Leading a product marketing agency, many podcasts, making movies, writing books. It's like I cloned 5 versions of myself. So, how many of you want to learn about intuition? Can you raise your hands? Okay. So I'm going to give you 3 tips that have worked for me, and they're pretty easy, so anyone can use them. The first step is to get quiet and release negativity. Intuition is a gentle whisper, and it can only be accessed when we're completely quiet. Okay, so maybe going for a hike in nature or taking a hike somewhere, being alone and disconnected from everyone is a place to start. And then intuition doesn't work when you're in a negative space, because oftentimes that can be misconstrued for a thought instead of intuition. So you have to be in a positive space. Now, the second tip is to use your body as a guide. Remember where the universe is going, towards expansion. So remember a time when you felt light and warmth and expansion. You just knew that this was the direction for you, right? It was a yes. And then remember a time where it felt dark and hollow and empty. It didn't feel right. Perhaps you had to convince yourself of the decision. I've learned that if we have to convince ourselves of a decision, it's usually not the right decision, because it's our logical mind trying to convince ourselves of something we know intuitively doesn't make sense. And then the last piece is to ask a question and write down all the answers that come up. What makes you feel expansive? What makes you feel contractive? Remove all the answers that make you feel contractive or neutral. We are so much more than our 5 common senses, and learning to listen to our intuition can change our life. And I believe with this skill set, we can collectively move in the direction of the rest of the universe, towards expansion instead of contraction. And we can behave as if all the life in this great, expansive universe mattered. And perhaps we can even make room for all the things that we can't understand with our logical mind and our 5 senses alone. Thank you.
I thought it was really fun. We were actually doing some mantras and breathing in the background before going on stage with a couple folks and doing some prayers. But it was really fun. We just, I think collectively the group was cheering each other on and really wanting every single person who is participating today to really shine. I've given talks before, not in this type of format, but it was just a joy to kind of be challenged in that way. So. My talk is about how intuition can help you become more expansive, and I really feel like intuition is kind of a gateway to personal freedom and to sovereignty, and I think that the world will completely transform if people have access to intuition and also study it and take, kind of formal education courses in intuition in the same way we take courses in other subjects. I really think intuition could completely change the way we perceive ourselves in the universe and how we relate to one another. So I hope people feel inspired after that. Yeah, so I actually wrote a very different talk. And then after I spoke to Fire about it, I actually changed the talk because she said to me, this is a great talk, but I feel like, what does your heart really want to talk about? And so I shifted it to this talk about intuition and how to become your expansive self, because it's something I've been on this path for a long time as a podcast host on the topic of intuition, and I've been studying intuition for a long time. So I really appreciated that prompt from Fire to talk about something in which my heart felt really connected to the subject. And so, I switched the talk, and I did change it a couple times, but for the most part, I wanted to have a personal story in the talk, and I also wanted to ground it in some research and data about intuition. I think that the fast-paced format was new for me. I've given talks before with slides or with no slides, but I think doing it in a way that feels very fast-paced. For me, I just knew that I wanted my slides to be much more symbolic rather than literal, so that way I didn't have to worry so much about getting the time exactly correct, because I didn't want to memorize my talk. I wanted it to be I wanted to know what I was going to say from a bullet point perspective, but I wanted it to flow. I also used Midjourney for a lot of my slides, so that was really helpful in creating them. And of course, I spent a lot of time in the inputs for Midjourney. Oh yeah, so I'm the host of this podcast called Gateways to Awakening, and you could subscribe to it on Apple and Spotify. I've interviewed close to 150 leaders in the world of intuition and consciousness, and it's now in the top 2% of all podcasts listened to globally, according to listener score on Apple and Spotify. So I'm very excited about the growth we've had, and I just have poured my heart into the show, and I really believe in the topics that we talk about. So I interviewed quantum physicists and neuroanatomists and doctors and academics and mystics, and it's all in service of elevating consciousness on the planet.